Dear colleagues, we are pleased to see all of you here for our regular meeting of discussion club Open World. As you know, the main organizer of this event is Arsenia Ukraine Foundation, and we do it on a regular basis, monthly, with inviting important people on important for Ukraine topics. And our main target audience are young people, young generation who can change this country, this part of the world, and that's why we always practice to conduct our events in English, just to keep direct contact to speaker. And before starting, I would like to welcome also a big audience of people who are listening and watching live streaming from Espresso TV, which is done in Ukraine right now. So for 40 minutes they will be with us. And one more thing is that because of live streaming, everybody who asks question has to use mic. So we have a colleague over there with microphone. So if you see this lady, her name is Alina, and if you have to ask question, I will show you have to raise your hands. I will show by my hand direction to you, and she will give you mic. And also, as we are very short in time, please keep with your questions very short. Maximum, I believe, 1 minute. Try to be short. So I hope that this event will be very interesting for you. And please ask questions you really care about. And our present topic is about the future of Ukraine, or reforms where our country is moving to. And we hope that you as the younger generation will be the driving agent for all these reforms and changing. And I'm so pleased to introduce to you Ambassador Джеффри, who is the best friend of Ukraine and who did a lot to our country and who spent with us so many changes. And I believe that though Ambassador is leaving soon Ukraine, but we will stay in touch, and this is not his last visit to Ukraine, to our events, and he will do a lot in future for our country. So Ambassador, the floor is yours for short introduction, and then we'll continue with audience.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, Taras, for the introduction. It's wonderful to be here. I particularly like this forum because it's young people. You are the future of Ukraine. I'm also pleased to have this opportunity because I know my friend and colleague, Ambassador Tominsky, recently did the same thing. And he and I have had an extraordinarily productive partnership throughout my time here, so it's a real honor for me to be following in his footsteps in this venue as in so many others. You know, I am coming to Kyiv today after a weekend in Odessa. And as I was thinking about this conversation that I want to have today, you know, I was reminded in many ways what I saw in Odessa over the weekend is a perfect metaphor for the changes that I see happening in Ukraine. 3 years, 2.5 years ago, the Ukrainian Navy was on its back after the invasion and annexation of Crimea. Today we are conducting very complicated exercises with 13 other countries. And it's very clear that there is an enormous sense of pride among the Ukrainian Marines and sailors that I was able to see this weekend. In the same way, I also spent some of my time in Odessa at the International Film Festival. And it was so impressive to see the creativity, the energy there among the Ukrainian entrants. And I think it was a good window into the remarkable upwelling of pride, but also artistic creativity that Ukraine has seen since your revolution 2.5 years ago. Ultimately, the process of change that's underway here is going to be decided by all of you. There's a process of generational change that's underway in Ukraine today. One of the most exciting things I see is the young people who have come into the Verkhovna Rada, who are part of government. All of these deputy ministers, all of them seem to be 30-something years old with a very different vision of where they want to take the country. And what's really important to me is I found this not just here at Kyiv, but also in the oblasts, whether it's in Kharkiv or Odessa or Dnipropetrovsk or Lviv. And one of the great pleasures of my job is I get to travel more than most Ukrainians. So I've seen a lot of this country over the past 3 years. And you see this extraordinarily impressive enthusiasm for participation in democratic governance, shaping the future of your country. That is so valuable, and so I would encourage everybody to hold on to that. Taras and the team have sent me a terrific list of questions that people already put together, and I really want to get to that quickly, but I was asked to do a little bit of a stock taking. And so I will spend just 2 or 3 minutes on that right now in terms of where I think Ukraine stands in the process of reform, in the process of building the modern democratic European state that the Ukrainian people have chosen and originally deserved. You really don't need me to do this because you have this fantastic civil society. Indeed, in many ways, Ukrainian civil society is probably the strongest, the most active anywhere in Europe today. And as I was thinking about my remarks today, I was looking over a document that was recently published by the reanimation package of reforms. And RPR flags many of the same issues that I would identify if I was trying to assess progress. But it's things we all know. It's progress in establishing new anti-corruption institutions. The NABU, the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor, the National Agency for the Prevention of Corruption. It's the selection of a new Prosecutor General, and I want to come back to that a little bit later. It's ProZorro and the changes that are happening in the government procurement system. The savings figures are astounding. Using these online, transparent, digitally driven platforms, savings of up to 1.7 billion hryvnia. That is a lot of money. Money that currently is being stolen from the Ukrainian people by individuals who manipulate the procurement process. RPR also identifies areas. One I'm especially proud of course, is the patrol police, with which the United States has been actively involved with and remains involved with today. Trainers from the United States, from states like Texas, California, who have come here to work with their Ukrainian counterparts. The energy sector has seen extraordinary transformation. One of the greatest successes, I would argue, of the past 2.5 years of the Ukrainian government has been denying Russia the energy weapon, which Moscow and Gazprom have used over the years to deny you strategic choice. This is the first winter, last winter, the first winter in history when Ukraine had to buy no gas directly from Gazprom. That is a declaration of energy independence. And today, if Ukraine chooses, or if Naftogaz chooses to purchase gas from Gazprom, fine. If the price is right, why not? But the point is, never again allow yourselves to be manipulated into the position where the Kremlin is able to use energy as a weapon to manipulate Ukrainian politics, to deny you strategic choice, and to place at risk your sovereignty and security. I was with Prime Minister Groysman today, along with my counterparts from the IMF, from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I was very encouraged to hear the clear message he shared with us, which he has said publicly before, but it was good to hear him say it today as well, that he is completely committed to see the long energy regulator pass through the Rada this autumn. It's extremely important to complete this process of transformation of the energy sector. I would also applaud the steps that the Groysman government has taken to move towards unification of energy prices. This has been called the most significant anti-corruption step that Ukraine has taken in 25 years of independence. And I think that's right, because ultimately all of these distortions in pricing have been manipulated by oligarchs, by people like Firtash, to enrich themselves at the cost of the Ukrainian people. And when I arrived here 3 years ago, Ukraine was spending 7% of gross domestic product on energy subsidies. Simply unsustainable. So that transformation is of fundamental importance. RPR also talks about the changes in the judiciary, the constitutional amendments on judicial reform of extreme importance, and create the opportunity to build a rule of law sector in which the Ukrainian people have confidence. Also, progress in the area of media. And I'm delighted you've got Espresso TV streaming today. A great example of all these new online, non-oligarch-controlled media outlets that are helping to transform the media space in Ukraine and build the media as a tool for the accountability of democratically elected politicians. And that's the role that the media needs to play. I would flag a couple of other issues which are not on the RPR list, but they're important. One is the financial sector, where the NBU, the central bank, has performed miracles in terms of restoring its credibility with international markets, demonstrating the bank's ability to perform as an independent, respected regulator, carrying out their role and their work based not on political influence, not on the question of which oligarchic group or another is most influential, but based on the rule of law. And that's how Ukraine is going to unlock their economic potential. The fact that the NBU has been able to shut down more than a third of Ukraine's financial institutions, many of which were dominated by corruption, related party lending, non-transparent procedures. All of that progress is a credit to Mrs. Hondareva and the very strong team that she has put in place at the top of the NBU. Another area that I would flag that is deserving of credit is what Ukraine has achieved through the resetting of your democratic institutions. A presidential election in May of 2014 that many people thought wouldn't happen, and then Rada elections in October of 2014, and then last year, the local elections, all of which have had the effect of resetting Ukraine's democratic institutions, legitimizing governance, and bringing to power not a completely new system, but a lot of people who have demonstrated their credentials as real reformers committed to working for the people who elected them. So I would cite all of those on the plus side of the ledger. In terms of work for the future, I really want to leave that topic for the conversation that we're going to have right now. One issue, though, that I would flag, which is of overarching importance, relates to the rule of law. And if I had to identify from my 3 years in Ukraine, the single area that still requires the greatest sustained focus and the greatest sustained pressure and engagement from civil society and young people like yourselves, it would be rule of law. Building a judiciary, a prosecutorial service, a court system in which the Ukrainian people have confidence. And that's the only test that matters. It doesn't matter what I think, it doesn't matter what Ambassador Tominsky thinks. What matters is, are these institutions which enjoy the trust and confidence of the Ukrainian people? In that regard, I'm encouraged by some important first steps, including the constitutional reforms on the judiciary, but also the selection of a new prosecutor general who has an extremely open and constructive relationship with his American counterparts. We actually have an American, Ukrainian-American, who worked in our Department of Justice as a prosecutor, dealing with criminal acts in the U.S., who has now come to Kyiv and is working with Prosecutor General Lutsenko. We also have had our FBI, our law enforcement experts, working with Ukrainian counterparts. This is not easy. Change is never easy, and it's particularly difficult in a system like Ukraine, where the justice system has been so heavily manipulated by corruption by oligarchic groups over the years. But a window is opened, and I am absolutely convinced that this is the best opportunity that Ukraine has had since independence to build the kind of rule of law society that the Maidan Revolution, the revolution of dignity, was intended to achieve, and which the Ukrainian people so clearly deserve. So, Taras, let me leave it there, and I'm delighted to take the conversation in whatever direction is useful, and I'm looking forward to a lot of challenging questions.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for a very wonderful background for our conversation. And now it's time for audience. As I told, we expect you to speak about the future of the country, so try to be more oriented on what we should achieve, how to make it, rather than describing the current problems, because we don't have, unfortunately, so much time. So I see fast hands, and please.
Mr. Пайєттом, sometimes looking to the backwards, you can tell something about future. You have quite an interesting experience, 3 years in Ukraine, which could count for a century for some countries. And looking back for your 3 years as a diplomat here, what probably 3 successes for you could you identify? And probably what things would you have done in other, or wouldn't you have done at all during 3 years?
Well, thank you, Alexei, and I appreciate your metaphor of the century, the 3 years that felt like a century, because it does feel like that sometimes. Let me do one of each to begin with. What am I proudest of? What I am most proud of is the way in which the United States government, led by President Obama, has been able to stand with the people of Ukraine during their darkest moments. I will always remember what it felt like in those days of March, April, May, and June of 2014, when nobody knew how far Putin was going to go, when nobody knew what was going to be the military development in the East. Nobody knew whether the economy was going to continue in a free fall. I think the United States was able to lead an international coalition that took decisive action to stabilize your economy. The first $1 billion loan guarantee that we did with Ukraine, actually when Deputy Prime Minister Kubik was running the central bank, that was a little bit like going into a casino. Nobody knew whether the economy was going to stabilize or not. It was a bet on the future of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Similarly, in the military area, the United States, President Obama personally, in many cases, led the effort to impose a very high cost on Russia through international sanctions in response to the violations of Ukraine's territory and sovereignty that the Kremlin committed. I think that played an important role in raising the price for the Kremlin, and hopefully giving some pause to those in Moscow who imagined that if they kept pouring in troops, kept staging provocations, whether in Kharkiv or Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, that eventually Ukraine would crack wide open. And then finally in the security sphere, where we have now committed more than $600 million in security assistance. We have another large delivery this week of unmanned UAVs. We'll be delivering more night vision in the next couple of days. We've delivered radars. We've helped give very brave Ukrainian men and women, the soldiers and Navy, land forces, and sailors of your country, the tools that they can use to hold at bay Russia's territorial aggression. So that's what I'm proudest of. What do I regret? It's very easy. The terrible human suffering. The fact that 100 people were killed on the Maidan. The fact that more than 10,000 people have now been killed in the Donbass as a result of Russia's war of aggression. It's so unnecessary, and it's deeply painful not to have some magic lever that you can pull to stop that. And so in the absence of that, what we've relied on is our diplomacy, making very clear to the Kremlin that as long as it continues in this direction, there will be no business as usual with the United States, and we will lead an international effort to impose a very high price. You know, I wish it was, if you had told me 2 years ago, on July 26th, 2014, that there would eventually be 10,000 people killed in this war, that nearly 2 million people, 1.7 million IDPs, that the war would grow to those dimensions, I would have said, impossible, it'll never happen. But it did, and responsibility for that rests at the door of one man. And I regret deeply that hasn't been stopped.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So I see a hand over there at the very end of the hall. Not the last one, but before last one.
Thank you. My name is Alexander Andreyka, and I'd like to ask you, how do you think your Ukrainian experience will be useful for you in Greece? I mean, are there any similar problems you can see now?
Thanks, Alexander. You know, it's hard for me to imagine that anything will be like what I've lived through over the past 3 years. And I think all of my diplomatic colleagues feel the same in many ways. This is such an extraordinary experience to be a witness to what the Ukrainian people have accomplished and lived through. I do think one thing is when I get time to collect my thoughts, I think one point which is relevant to me, Ukraine, of course, is the birthplace of democracy. Ukraine, on the other hand, is a country where over 2.5 years, 45 million Ukrainians have fought with extraordinary courage to build and defend their democracy. And I want to think more about that as well. These are two large European states, both of whom are at the outer periphery of Europe, so they're struggling with the challenges. And I think the question, which is of strategic importance for the United States, of what Europe represents as a model of governance, of values. There is a reason why millions of refugees are still fleeing Africa and the Middle East to try to get to Europe, because of what Europe represents. The Europe of democracy, the Europe of values, the Europe of rule of law. And I think the success of that European model, which has brought unprecedented peace and prosperity in the decades since the end of the Second World War, will remain of lasting and strategic importance to the United States. So I think that's relevant. And then finally, one last connection, which I will confess I did not discover until I was in Odessa, is, and those of you who've spent time in Odessa will know that, of course, there's Greshka Ploshcha at the end of Greek Street, and I never knew why was it called Greshka Ploshcha, but it turns out that in the early 1800s there was a community of Greek shipping magnates who lived in Odessa, and in fact it was Odessa where much of the initial conception of Greek nationalism was, the foundation for that was laid. So again, I don't think anything I do in the rest of my diplomatic career will be quite like what I've lived through here in Ukraine. But the nature of our profession is you try to learn from every experience. And what I've learned over 3 years in Ukraine is the extraordinary attractive power of the European model, of values, of governance, of rule of law. And You know, I will always remember, you know, walking out on the Maidan, and, you know, in the dark of winter, in the winter of 2013 and 14, and seeing those EU flags flapping in the wind. And I think that is a very powerful message for all of us as members of the democratic world. But it's a particularly important message for Europe and for institutional Europe at a time when there is a debate in many European capitals about the relationship between national identity and supranational identity. But good question, so thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. So there is a person standing in the last row, and we will come back to first.
My name is Andrei Magas. I'm an investor. You gave overall positive evaluation of what has been done in Ukraine in the last few years. Some members of civic society believe that much more could be done in this time. Could you please evaluate, under given circumstances, how much more could realistically be achieved?
Yeah, thanks, Andrei. I guess let me answer the question this way. First, I will say, I think oftentimes the government, the authorities, are not given the full credit that they deserve for what has been accomplished. And that's why I tried to spend some time at the beginning ticking through some of the key areas where I see progress. I think one of the things that's healthy about Ukrainian democracy, and certainly healthy about Ukrainian civil society, is the fact that very few people here say, hey, slow down this horse, reform is moving too fast. What civil society, what people say is, we want more reform. Frankly, when I travel in the oblasts, whether it's Lviv, Kharkiv, Odessa, you get out of Kyiv, and what everybody says, we want more decentralization, we want more reform, we want more transparency, we want more transactions online. You know, one of our successes, I'm very proud of what we did in Odessa with Governor Saakashvili's support to establish an administrative services center, which was built to provide a place where residents could go to get their passports renewed or change a lease or register a business. And, you know, I visited the Odessa Center, and you talk to people there and they all talk about, first of all, they talk about how great it is that nobody's asking for a bribe. They talk about how convenient it is that they're able to do this in a transparent, open setting. They talk about how economically valuable it is that they're able to do it quickly. But what's really encouraging to me is when I travel around the country now, whether it's talking about e-governance with officials in Lviv, or talking to Governor Ryan in Kharkiv, where we are helping to build a similar administrative services center, or in smaller cities like Mariupol. And when I was in Mariupol in April, I talked with the mayor and with his impressive team about what they want to do. And they've actually, with there too, we're helping to establish one of these administrative services centers. They've taken an old local movie theater, they've gutted the building, and they're trying to adopt those same models. And I think, you know, one of the fundamental principles of democratic governance is that government exists to serve the people. I'm constantly reminded of that as an official confirmed by our Senate. You know, it's made very clear to me that I work for the people. The Congress plays a critical role in my approval, my ability to represent the United States. That was not what it felt like when I arrived in Ukraine. What it felt like was that the government, the institutions of government, were controlled by Yanukovych and his cronies and the family. And that's what brought about the Maidan, I think, was the rejection by the Ukrainian people of a model in which government existed to serve the interests of a family. And you saw the results of that at Meshahiria and all of the corruption which was revealed around the energy ministry, the bags of diamonds, the artwork, all the rest of it. Ukraine today is building a different culture of governance, in which governance serves the people. So, I think, is the task of reform finished? Of course not. I think the really relevant question for 2016 is that reform irreversible? That is, have so many changes been made in institutions, in laws, in procedures, and most important of all, in psychology, that there can never be another Yanukovych. That you can't go back to the model of a government which is authoritarian, fundamentally corrupted, fundamentally controlled from outside of this country. I think you're very, very close to that point of no going back. And that's a good goal. And then, and once you get to that point, you need to keep driving forward. And, I agree with President Poroshenko, and I agree with Prime Minister Groisman, that Ukraine's goal should be to become a member of the European Union. And that's easy for me to say because I'm the American ambassador, so I don't have a vote on whether there are going to be any other member states in the EU. But that certainly is a realistic frame for thinking about Ukraine's future. And I like the way some of my friends in Ukrainian civil society put it. We're making these changes, we're making these reforms, not to qualify ourselves for the EU, but to build the kind of modern democratic Ukraine that we want, and that we want for our children. And then if the EU decides that they want to have us, they will stand to benefit, because Ukraine ultimately offers a large market with literally millions and millions of consumers yet to come into the middle class, all of whom are going to buy cars, air conditioners, all of that. A very rich reservoir of human capital, human talent, some of the best agricultural land in the world. And what has held you back for 25 years is the terrible legacy of the Soviet Union and this huge deficit of governance, which was left in the aftermath of the Soviet years. And now you've begun to address that. So it's for me, as somebody who tries to think strategically and think about where the world is going over the next 10 or 20 years, it's a very exciting time to think about Ukraine, because it is both tied up with enormous potential, but also profoundly positive for the West, for the values that we hold dear.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I see one more hand over there, and then there is a lady in the third row. And at the same time, I would like to say goodbye, unfortunately, to all our audience live streaming, because they have another schedule, so we stop live streaming at this moment. We thank all of you watching us, and we just continue our conversation here in the hall. And just to be very short, two more questions, if you will be short, and if
I'll try to do this.
It would be great. Okay, thank you. Good question. Ambassador Turansky, I see you.
You demonstrated just your ability to see through the big wall of Ukrainian representatives of mass media. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, I am Igor Turansky, Ambassador of Ukraine, retired after 41 years of diplomatic service of Ukraine, SSR, and independent of Ukraine. Speaking on my own behalf, I would like to thank you very much for your serving as an ambassador of the United States in Ukraine, and to wish you all the best in Greece, where you will be appointed to be another ambassador of the United States to this country. My two questions are very short. First, how do you evaluate the situation in Ukraine? Better or worse, at the beginning of your diplomatic service in Kyiv, or just now when you are preparing to leave? And second question is, are you personally, don't you tired on the behavior, on the situation in Ukraine, where a lot of good words are being pronounced, and so many practical deeds are being done? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Just very quickly, I mean, first of all, in terms of before and after, the situation is immeasurably better today than it was in 2013. because Ukrainian democracy is so much richer, because Ukrainian civil society is energized, and because there is a sense of hope that Ukrainians this time will get it right. And I think that also answers to a large degree your question about words versus deeds. And I think this is exactly what the Revolution of Dignity was about. It was not about words, it was about how the government behaved. And in that regard, I am of the school which believes that ultimately Ukrainian civil society, Ukrainian democracy, the Ukrainian people will prevail. Because in fact, if I look at the past 2.5 years, and I said this in an interview the other day, one of the most important lessons of this period is never bet against the Ukrainian people. This is an extraordinarily resilient, creative, courageous society. And I think that's going to serve you very well in the long term.
So please, lady on the first row.
Hello, my name is Irina. I am represent Open University of Maidan. We teach Ukrainian people society competence, and now we need some help with promote this idea to our people. Maybe you know some American experts can help us in marketing or PR.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I guess, let me answer it this way. Nobody from outside is going to be able to build the kind of Ukraine that the Ukrainian people deserve. You are the only ones who get to choose, and the challenge is that you have to do the hard work. I do think you are exactly right that there is a huge informational component to Ukraine's diplomatic task today because of how the Kremlin has weaponized information and tried to create this narrative that Ukraine is a divided society, that nothing has changed, that Ukraine is hopelessly corrupt, that Ukraine is controlled by oligarchs. Anybody, or fascists, that one's fun too, anyone who lives here knows that that's not true. What you have to do as Ukrainians is keep telling that story. And I think, especially for Americans, and one of the things that I have benefited from this job is a lot of support from our Congress. We have had more than 100 members of the U.S. Congress who have come here since the spring of 2014. And all of them, when they sit down with Ukrainian people, with Ukrainian politicians, with Ukrainian civil society, they discover a narrative which is not that different from ours in the United States. We also were a country born in revolution. We are a country defined by the principle that all men are created equal. A country which is deeply committed to values of democracy. And I think that's one of the reasons that I am today fundamentally optimistic about where Ukraine is going. Because I think you have made your choice regarding that civilizational choice, that values-based choice. And so the issue is, how do you move forward? We will be with you. The United States will stand with the people of Ukraine. President Obama has made that clear. Vice President Biden has made that clear. Our Congress has made that clear. But you have to do the hard work. You have to hold your politicians to a high standard. You have to call out your media when they misrepresent the situation. And because we live in a connected, globalized world, you have to keep explaining to everybody, whether they're in London or Brussels or Berlin or Ottawa or Washington, how Ukraine is changing and how you're building a new society. And nobody is better for doing that than the kind of young people who are in this room today, because you not only can say it, but you're living it. And that's incredibly, incredibly important.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Unfortunately, our time is over because Ambassador's schedule is very tight these days. We had only 45 minutes, but for the end, I traditionally asking our guests one question. We are asking for inspirational message, and you almost did it by your last words, but we want from the other angle. We want to ask you not as an ambassador, but as a person, what was very important for you, for your career, life, maybe motto of your life. As you see, many young people around here, so something that you can share your experience, individual experience, and maybe something that can help them to moving forward to the future as a personalities.
Yeah, thanks, Taras. Let me answer it two ways. One is less inspirational, but it's very practical. One of my bosses years ago encouraged me always to think strategically. And by that, he meant, we do lots of things in life, especially in the workplace and what we're doing, but we don't often enough stop to ask, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? And I have found that an incredibly powerful question to ask. Anytime you're presented with a choice, anytime you're presented with a decision, step back for a second and ask, what are we trying to do? What is your goal? And the value of that is, it's like in Star Trek, it's Spock, it forces you to behave rationally as opposed to emotionally, which is what a lot of us as human beings tend to do. So that's a Spock answer, so it's not very inspiring. So let me try something more inspiring as well. I think on the inspiring point, the most important message that I would deliver to Ukrainians in particular, and to everybody in the country, from President Poroshenko right on down, is a line which comes from one of our movies about World War II. Those of you who've seen Saving Private Ryan, the Tom Hanks movie. But one of the last lines of that movie is "Earn this," and I think it's very relevant to Ukraine as well. There are people who have made extraordinary sacrifices for this country over the past 2.5 years, starting with more than 2,000 soldiers who have paid the ultimate price fighting to defend your soil, 100 people who died on the Maidan in defense of Ukraine's European choice. If nothing else, they have earned the respect and the hard work of everybody else who's left behind to make the very best of this opportunity, to really build a different kind of Ukraine, and to make the kind of choices which will, as we talked about earlier in response to Alexander's question, make reform irreversible. And I think that's what makes Ukraine, and what makes my time in Ukraine particularly poignant for me, is the fact that there are these extraordinary sacrifices which the Ukrainian people have made. We will do our part, as I said to Irina, but you have to do yours. And I think now is the opportunity. Seize this opportunity and make the sacrifices worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for being today with us, for working in Ukraine, and I hope for staying.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for the terrific questions, both the ones I was able to answer and the ones that I didn't get around to.